Okay, all right. Hey, Chris, how are you? Nice to see you again. Some people coming in. Let me find my notes here so I can get started. And so welcome. Welcome. It's been a while. Hey, Chris. I think it's been a month since we had one of these. I usually do them every 2 weeks, and I didn't have one 2 weeks ago. So it's good to be back. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Renee Roberts. I'm a functional nutrition counselor, vitality coach, and registered hypnotherapist, and founder of Nourish to Live RX. And I work with typically women over 40 years old and help them sleep better and have more energy through the day and just feel amazing. So that's what I do. Before I introduce my lovely guest speaker, I just going to throw out a few logistics. Hey, Tina, how are you? Those of you that are on right now know the logistics, know what to do, but feel free to say hi in the chat. Chris, you already did. Tell us where you're connecting from. If you have questions throughout the session, feel free to type them in the Q&A box or the chat box, but we'll collect them to the end. So Amy will go through her presentation first, and then we'll have a little Q&A session afterwards, and there'll be plenty of time for that. And of course, if you want to come on live, feel free to raise your hand and we'll bring you on audio if you have any juicy questions for Amy. Hey, Tina. Okay, so let me introduce Amy. So Amy's going to talk to us about the 5 reasons we are struggling to control our gut symptoms. I'm super excited about this. You know, I think we've heard this saying before, your gut is your second brain. So I'm super excited to hear all about this stuff that Amy's going to teach us tonight. So Amy is a Monash certified IBS health coach who's on a mission to help women feel at home in their bodies. So when she's not elbow deep in gluten-free flour, this pun-loving Canadian can be found with a great book, a giant cup of coffee, and at least one dog on her lap, which we may see tonight because she has a dog that just had surgery. So apparently she's pretty needy. Her name is Pancake. So if you see her, you can say hi. Amy, where do you hail from? You said you're in Canada. So where in Canada?
Yeah, I'm from Toronto.
Oh, me too. Oh my God.
What?
How did we not know this? How did we not know this before when we met? That's so funny. Oh man. Well, the people that are on right now, they're also, Tina's from Toronto. I know Chris is from Oakville. So yeah, so welcome. This is so exciting. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you, and you can get started and tell us everything you know about gut health and what we can do.
I like nerding out, so we might not have time for everything I know, but I will try and get as much in as possible while still being respectful for everybody's time. So thank you so much, Renee, for inviting me here. I'm super excited to talk to everybody about gut health. I am specialized in IBS, so irritable bowel syndrome. So a lot of my examples kind of come from that bent, but the information that we're sharing today can really be applied to any kind of functional gut disorder. So functional gut disorders are things that don't have a structural or a chemical source in the body. So it's not like hormonal, it's not something like a GI tumor or things like that. Is kind of where this information comes into play. Like Renee said, I am a Monash certified IBS health coach. Monash University developed something called the low FODMAP diet. This is a protocol specifically for IBS, but it's starting to expand more and more as we are learning more about kind of how FODMAPs impact our body. But we're going to talk about a whole range of tools and strategies to manage any GI symptoms that you're having, and also kind of ways that we look at functional gut disorders that may or may not be helpful to you. So kind of having these things in the back of your mind. If you have any questions, I love questions. So feel free to drop them in the chat or drop them in the Q&A box. And I will be super excited to answer anything you have. If you think of something afterwards, Renee has all of my contact information, and I'm more than happy to answer questions kind of as they come to your mind. But let's get started. I'm going to talk about 5 ways that you might be struggling to get your GI symptoms under control, and how we kind of reframe these in our brains so that you might have a more simplified strategy going forward, or you might be able to kind of let go of things that aren't serving you and focus on things that are going to get you better symptom control. Okay, so number 1, and I always like to start with this one, is that you are only focusing on food. So it makes total sense that for a GI disorder, we're going to start with kind of what you eat, but what do we eat? Our diet is actually just a tiny piece of the GI symptom pie. So like I said, it makes total sense that you're eating things and they're kind of jump-starting this misfiring system in your body, and that we would tend to kind of blame the food. Well, I was fine, and then I ate something and my symptoms kind of popped up. Like I said, makes total sense. And everything you're hearing on Instagram and the internet and YouTube and all these things, very food focused, because that feels like something that's in your control. You can leave the internet and say, cool, I have this list of do this, don't do that. And I have this feeling of control that I can take action. I have agency where I might be able to figure this out for myself, because I don't know if you've experienced this before, but GI disorders, especially when they're kind of under that functional umbrella, we tend to get dismissed. We tend to get kind of, booted out of doctor's office. I have irritable bowel syndrome myself. So these are things that I've experienced as well. So finding something that you can kind of grab and it makes you feel like you're doing something productive and you can figure this out on your own makes total sense, but we really don't want to start with your food. Okay, what we want to start with is these external sort of lifestyle things, because we know that they have a huge impact on your body and what it feels like to sort of live in, day out, managing your symptoms. So we always want to start with sleep quality and sleep quantity. We know that sleep has a major impact on your digestive system. So we want to make sure not only are you getting enough sleep, but that sleep is high quality. Because if you're having an issue like sleep apnea, for example, where you're getting the hours of being unconscious, but that's not quality rest for your body, we're going to see that reflected almost immediately in your GI system. Okay. Another thing is stress management. And I know that's really easy for me to say from this side of the screen, but managing your stress really does have an immediate impact on your body, especially if it's like that sort of like daily chronic stress that really builds up in our digestive tract. And the reason for that is if you're being put in a state of fight or flight, where we've got that sympathetic nervous system turned on, your body actually goes through a sort of mechanical process where it's drawing blood away from your digestive tract. It's drawing energy away from your digestive tract, because that is not an essential function. We need it to be alive, but we don't need it to fight off bears. We don't need it to sort of run real fast. And so when we're in these sort of stressed out states, our nervous system is flipping and it's essentially turning off our digestive tract. And so again, this happens with poor sleep and it happens with stress. So here are 2 main things that we always want to kind of start investigating with. Am I feeling rested when I wake up? Am I getting enough hours of sleep? Am I experiencing chronic stress, even if it's kind of low grade? And kind of tracking that through like a food journal or working with a coach like me, and I'll kind of track it for you and see sort of if this, then that. If I get a good night's sleep, what does it feel like to be in my body? What does my digestion look like? If I don't get enough sleep, then what do my symptoms look like? What does it feel like to sort of live in my body? So once we've kind of taken a look at your sleep, at your stress management, and that just might be a conversation with your healthcare team, we also want to look at sort of basic gut hygiene. So this is things like meal timing and spacing. Are you having 3 big meals? Are you having sort of small meals close together? Is there a space in your day where you have like a giant gap between when you're having a meal or a snack? Because these all impact how your gut works mechanically. So we want to kind of investigate all of these things, and then we want to move on to general gut irritants. So before we pull anything crazy out of your diet, we want to check and see, are you responding to spicy foods? Are you responding to greasy foods? Are you responding to alcohol? These things that we know bother a lot of people. It can be simple sometimes as saying, you know what, that's a little too spicy for me, or I need to combine this with something, to help coat my stomach so it's not getting so upset. And we find that these general sort of IBS hygiene things can often be more than enough to manage your daily symptoms. So if you're kind of having symptoms that show up sometimes and not other times, or they're kind of just always circling around in the background, before you start touching what you actually eat, we definitely want to look into sleep, stress management, and then these basic sort of GI hygiene things, okay? So number 2, again, before we get into cutting anything out, we want to focus on adding things in. Food has magical powers, okay? I said it. Food has magical powers. It feeds your microbiome. So those are the kind of gut bugs that live in your digestive tract. We want to make sure that we're getting a good variety of all the different kinds of bugs. They're really being supported. So we want to make sure that we're giving them a variety of food. And that's just because we don't actually know what they eat yet. The microbiome is kind of this new frontier in science, and we're really still trying to figure out like what bugs go where, what is a good amount of bugs, what is, you know, a harmful or sort of less productive amount of bugs, and what the heck do we feed them in order to keep them healthy. So right now we kind of take an everything in the kitchen sink approach. So we want to have lots of colors, lots of different types of fibers. So fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts, beans, seeds, all these different things, because, you know, we kind of figured out these groups are kind of helpful to us. We think that they eat these kinds of foods, but we're not quite sure. So again, we treat them like toddlers. We just send them a little bit of everything. And we're finding that the more diet diversity we have, the more diversity we have in the microbiome. So again, instead of pulling things out, first, we want to try making sure that we are getting that rainbow of colors and textures in our diet and see if that makes a shift. And you're going to see that happen really quickly. When you eat a meal, it's going to impact the next 50 regenerations of all of these gut bugs. And so as you're making these changes to your diet, where again, instead of pulling things out, we're adding those colors, we're adding those textures, you're going to see in a matter of weeks whether that's helpful to you or not, okay? So another thing about pulling foods out is that we're going to end up missing a lot of different essential nutrients. So often when you see sort of lists of eat this, not that, it's like pull out all the wheat or pull out all the dairy or pull out all the soy, and you're going to end up missing sort of gaps in your nutrition. And so sometimes that is absolutely necessary. I totally understand. Like I work in an area where we do the low FODMAP diet. The entire thing is pulling things out, but also putting things in. But again, if you're not sure what's going on, pulling things out of your diet kind of willy-nilly is not always helpful. It's going to sort of like take food away from your good gut bugs. It's also going to take away nutrition from your body. Okay. So another thing that we see quite often, especially in the IBS camp, is people focusing on eating like healthy. And I do not like that term. That is not something that we use in my camp. But we're finding that, especially for people with IBS, focusing on eating healthier, making big changes to your diet can do a couple of things, most of which are not going to be helpful to you. So first of all, if you're switching to a diet where you were kind of eating out, like at restaurants, if you were kind of, leaning on processed foods, like that's a-okay where I come from. But if you're making a sudden shift into, making everything at home from scratch or increasing your fiber kind of out of nowhere, just as an FYI, like we all know fiber can help with constipation, but too much fiber, especially too much fiber all at once, can actually make constipation worse. So if you are feeling constipated, you're a little bit backed up, you're noticing that things aren't kind of flowing in their natural rhythm, we want to make sure we're actually cleaning the system out first. And that's something that you want to talk to with your healthcare team about if they want to use something osmotic, where it just kind of adds a little bit of extra water, gets everything kind of flowing, or if they want to do something that actually touches your muscle contractions. So it's really kind of going to depend on what your constipation looks like, but we want to make sure that that system is kind of empty before we start adding in the fiber. And then of course we want to add it in tiny increments, and we want to stop as soon as you get sort of that rhythm back, or you're getting the bowel function that you're looking for. There is such a thing as too much fiber, and it is not going to help you, okay? Another thing that we don't talk about enough is that certain types of fiber can relieve diarrhea. So there's a type of fiber called soluble fiber, and that creates a gel in the intestines. It helps slow everything down, which means that a little bit more water can be pulled out, but it's also going to pull some of that liquid stool together, which is going to make a properly formed bowel movement for you. So while when we see diarrhea, people are like really quick on the FODMAP train, and we're going to talk about that in a second. They're really quick on kind of pulling out dairy and things like that are known to cause diarrhea, when really adding some oats might be what you need, or adding some flax or some linseeds to a smoothie or something like that can really be the thing that tips the scale for you. So again, adding too much fiber can cause constipation, or adding the wrong kind of fiber can cause constipation. And then sort of leaving out these sort of magic fibers, we call them, you're missing opportunities to support your body because you're pulling out instead of putting in, okay? So another thing, and this is one of my specialties, is something called FODMAPs. So FODMAPs are fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And all that means is that they are short chains of sugar Each one of those names just means how many sugar units are going to be in that chain. And they do two specific things. They either pull in excess water, or they're highly fermentable, or they're evil and they do both. Okay, and so you're going to find FODMAPs in fruits, vegetables, nuts, beans, seeds, and dairy. Okay, so again, when we see people just pull out FODMAPs willy-nilly, they're not getting the information they need where, hey, there's this specific group, this one chain just does not sit correctly in my body. And we end up pulling out all of these things instead of just the one or two foods that were actually causing problems for you. Now, an interesting thing about FODMAPs, and this is something that I really enjoy sort of in my coaching program, is that FODMAPs we can use their powers for good. Okay, so for people with constipation, for example, we can sort of increase the amount of foods that pull in water, and we find that they can have bowel movements way easier, no straining, no pain. They're really getting that rhythm going in their body. And so they kind of know when they're going to have bowel movements. It's not a surprise. It's not kind of when they're out like at the bookstore or at, Canadian Tire or whatever. So again, finding ways to add things in instead of taking things out can really improve things quite quickly. And then you're not left with a whole bunch of restrictions. Okay. So that was number 2, which is focusing on cutting things out instead of adding things in. Now, number 3 is that you're not addressing mechanical issues in your body. Okay. So instead of focusing on what we're putting in your body, we really want to think about what your body's doing with the food that it's getting. Okay. So this is really just the way that your body is going to function on autopilot. So first of all, there are 3 kind of main muscle problems that we talk about, at least in my community. And I'll give you kind of the skinny. All of these you would deal with a physiotherapist, and they're quite quick. Like they're resolved very quickly with something called biofeedback, which is where your physical therapist is going to help you understand kind of what the correct feeling is in your body. And then you can go and practice saying, this is not the right feeling, this is the right feeling, and kind of re-coordinate everything, if that makes sense. So first of all, we have something called dyssynergic bowel movements. So these are uncoordinated muscles kind of anywhere in your digestive tract. And it's basically a muscle is supposed to be in sync with everything, and somebody is not arriving on cue. And again, a physiotherapist was kind of help you either increase your peristalsis strength or find ways to re-coordinate those muscles, and then use biofeedback so that you can retrain your body. Hey, when this happens, you're supposed to be doing this. Another thing is called paradoxical muscle contraction. So this is when muscles that are supposed to relax end up contracting, and vice versa. And this is quite problematic with people who have constipation. So for people with constipation, because there's a lot of straining and there's a lot of, like bearing down and pushing, when you kind of have that urge to go and nothing's really working, sometimes what will happen is the sphincters in your rectum. So there's 2, there's the emergency fail-safe, and then there's kind of the exit. We need those to relax in order to pass our stool. But because we're spending so much time really constricting and really kind of pushing, sometimes those muscles would get the wrong idea, and they'll think, hey, like, when my gut is preparing to release a bowel movement, I'm supposed to contract. And so your body's, kind of getting everything ready to go. And your sort of sphincter muscles are going like, contracting as tight as they can. And they're thinking, we're helping so much. We're doing such a good job. And it's creating more straining, and it's creating sort of more pressure in your bowel. And it makes it harder to have that bowel movement. So again, a physiotherapist is going to help teach your muscles, this is what it feels like to be relaxed. And then when you're taking sort of time in the bathroom, you're sort of reassessing your bowel training habits, you'll be able to know what that relaxed feeling is, and hopefully everything will start working in the right order again. So the final sort of muscle thing that we have going on here that's really common in functional GI disorders is something called Abdominophrenic Dyssynergia. So this one I think is really cool. I've had it for a while. It's less cool when it's flaring, but it's really neat to talk about. It's a paradoxical contraction of your diaphragm and your pelvic floor, and sometimes of like the actual abdominal muscles or that abdominal sort of corset that you have. So what is going to happen is when you're having a functional bowel movement, your diaphragm and your pelvic floor are going to contract together. and they're going to increase that intra-abdominal pressure, which is how we kind of move our stool through our body. So we're getting ready to poop, we create this pressure, and then we're able to have a bowel movement. Now, the same thing that happened with the paradoxical muscle contractions in the rectum, this is our either abdominal muscles when they're supposed to contract, relax, and that can make some crazy bloating where you're like, I didn't know my body could expand this way, and it's because the muscles that are supposed to be holding everything in have relaxed. And again, they think they're doing a great job, but they are doing the opposite of what they're supposed to be doing in that moment. Or you can have either the diaphragm or the pelvic floor or both. When they're supposed to contract, they're relaxing. So again, you would go through the physiotherapist. They would help you sort of cognitively figure out what does it feel like when that muscle's contracted, and then you would go through practicing that when you're ready to have a bowel movement. And we usually see within 4 to 6 weeks that your body has caught on and is doing it correctly again. So those are 3 things that we kind of look for in your muscle mechanics. We also like to sort of check out if you have reduced gut muscle tone. So your gut is a muscle, just like everything else. And so if you were experiencing a ton of diarrhea, sometimes we don't need those contractions, right? We're not relying on those peristalsis waves to have bowel movements because your body's just kind of doing it. You might have a lot of urgency where it's just kind of coming out. Or if you're having excessive constipation where you're going days without having bowel movements, your stomach's getting all distended and swollen, because those muscles are sort of stretched out for so long, sometimes they lose their tone. So there's a couple of things that we do there. Either we try and increase the strength of your peristalsis waves, which is that muscle sort of contraction that flows through your body and moves our stool kind of through each phase of its digestion. Or there are certain medications that will do little micro contractions for you, and those will help tone up your muscles just by having them contract lightly for a couple of weeks. If sort of none of those are the key, we've kind of gone through all of those. We really want to look at your digestive hygiene. So again, how you're eating your food. So how are you chewing? Are you chewing things that are crunchy? Are you eating a lot of sort of liquid things like soup or broth? Are you eating while you're working? Because if you're ignoring your body is also ignoring your body, and it might miss some of those signals like, hey, like you actually need to make a bunch of room because I just ate, you know, this grilled cheese sandwich, you did not make enough room. And now we have kind of a traffic jam in your gut. So again, just looking at how you're eating your food, how you're kind of spacing that out, and what you're doing while you're eating also can help us increase those peristalsis waves, make sure that your muscles are going sort of in the right order. And if they're not, by paying attention to your body while you're eating, sort of following a structure while you're eating, you're going to be able to sort of nail down these problems and get yourself to the right specialist. So number 4 is you're following contradictory advice. And what I mean by that is you're following information that is not meant for your body. Okay, so GI disorders sit in every single person's body differently. That's why they're kind of hard to diagnose, kind of hard to figure out which camp you fit in. So the example that I like to give is diarrhea. And I know we're talking about diarrhea a lot. I'm sorry, it's kind of my niche. But when we talk about diarrhea, there are 3 kind of things that can happen. We have dysbiosis, which is sort of an imbalance of your good and your bad bacteria. And I don't like the word bad because they're not harmful to you, like they're supposed to be there. It's just if they sort of get out of balance, they're not as helpful as your sort of good bacteria, if that makes sense. We have dysbiosis, which is that imbalance. We have something called overflow diarrhea, which is when you're constipated. So you have like a little poop and it's trying to get out and it's not sort of making its way out on time. It's kind of getting stuck. And so your body's doing a bunch of contractions. It's like, cool, we're going to move it. It's fine. We're going to squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. But in that squeezing, what ends up happening is that all of the liquid stool that's not quite ready to go is the only thing that can exit your body. So it's moving around the stool that's stuck, and you're going to end up having diarrhea while your body's trying to pass this stool that's kind of parked. Another thing that we can have is flare-up diarrhea. This is also caused by constipation. A shocking amount of diarrhea is actually caused by constipation, just so you know. But flare-up diarrhea is the same kind of deal. Your body's contracting and contracting, trying to move this parked stool. And when it finally manages to budge, because it's kind of gotten in a rhythm of contractions, it can't turn them off right away. Okay, so you're going to pass that first stool. It might be dry, it might be hard to pass, but it's going to be followed up by maybe hours of diarrhea. So again, we have 3 different problems: dysbiosis, that imbalance in your gut bugs. We have overflow diarrhea, which is that one stool that's kind of parked and then the liquid stool is moving around it, or we have flare-up diarrhea, which is you've been constipated for a while and your body finally kind of unplugs, and then it's followed by a whole bunch of diarrhea. So each of these things is going to have different treatments, right? Because the source of this problem is kind of different. I mean, overflow diarrhea and flare-up diarrhea are kind of the same, but the idea is if you were to treat it like diarrhea, right? Like for overflow diarrhea, you don't necessarily know that the problem is that you're constipated. So if you take an antidiarrheal, now this stool that's parked is going to be stuck there for even longer because we have slowed down your gut now, right? So that's kind of counterproductive. So the problem when you're following advice that's not actually meant for your gut, first of all, you might not see any change in what's happening for you, or your symptoms may get worse, right? If we're trying to treat diarrhea, but the problem is constipation, and you take something that creates constipation, we have now created a much bigger problem, okay? So again, the risk of sort of doing something that's not meant for your body is that if you're doing more than one thing, and this is totally common, you come out of your, dietitian's office or you come out of your doctor's office and they've given you a couple of tools to try. So you're trying them all together, just like you were told. One of them may work, right? And you're not going to know because something else went totally haywire or threw you off balance. And so now you're going to abandon both tools, right? Because you're like, I tried them and they did not help, or they made things worse. And so these are not for me. And so I have clients who come in all the time and they're like, I have literally tried everything. And they're not wrong, but we've missed information about pieces that do work for your body because we were trying them when everything was feeling really chaotic. Okay. So my number 5 kind of final tip is that if you're like, I'm in the IBS camp. So one of the things that I see a lot is people trying all of these kind of IBS tools, IBS strategies, and they don't have IBS, right? Or you don't have the functional disorder that you were kind of stamped with. Or the alternative is we've done all of these sort of tools and strategies. We've seen a small shift in your symptoms. And what's happened is we've actually fixed your IBS symptoms. Like your IBS symptoms are consistently under control, but you've uncovered something else, right? So when everything was super chaotic, it was kind of diarrhea all the time or incredible pain or cramping, and we've lowered that. Now you're feeling something else in your body and you're like, whoa, hey, what is that? It might be still GI symptoms where you're like, well, I'm getting a better rhythm, but it's not quite right. Or my diarrhea is feeling better, but I'm still having it. Or I'm still having like abdominal pain or something like that. The problem is if you don't have the technical skills to separate IBS symptoms from other things, you might keep trying to treat that IBS and kind of hit a plateau. You're like, well, this is better, but it's still really impacting my life, or it's still really, impairing my ability to go out and do the things that I want to do. It's important to remember that there are other things that can happen in your gut as well, sometimes caused by the original issue, or sometimes, again, they're just happening in parallel. So some examples of things that I've had happen in my own sort of clients are, I have a lot of people who come in being told that they have IBS and they actually have a bacterial infection. So they might have SIFO, which is small intestinal fungal overgrowth. They might have SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or EMO, intestinal methanogen overgrowth, or they might just have H. pylori. So all of these things really mimic IBS symptoms. They really respond to IBS treatments like the low FODMAP program. Sorry, that's not a treatment. That's a tool that we use to find sensitivities. But they're really responding to these things. And the second we put foods back in their diet, their symptoms flare up all over again. Another thing I've seen a ton is something called bile acid malabsorption, BAM. It's also sometimes called bile acid diarrhea, BAD. Love those acronyms. But what happens is you're trying all of your sort of IBS tools and strategies and nothing's happening. And it's because BAM is actually an issue with how fat is broken down in your body. So nothing that you're touching with FODMAPs, nothing about like sleep or stress management. There is a mechanical issue in your body that's kind of hard to test for. But if you've been diagnosed with IBS-D for diarrhea and really nothing that you're trying is helping, if you've had any kind of gallbladder surgery, if you've had a problem with your gallbladder, you can ask to go in and have your gallbladder tested. This is kind of where we see this BAM or BAD. I had another client who's having excruciating abdominal pain. Like it was not manageable. We went through all of her IBS techniques. Like she really got all of her GI symptoms under control, but this like abdominal pain was just killing her. We got her to a chiropractor. It turned out that she had a crack in her spine and she was actually having back pain that was radiating out into her abdomen. I've had other clients with endometriosis. I've had clients who are having GI symptoms that are related to allergies, which is not something that everybody knows about. So if you're noticing you're getting a lot of GI pain at the same time that you're getting allergy symptoms, definitely talk to an allergist, because GI stomach pains can be related to anaphylaxis, like the early stages. And so that's definitely something that you want to know about. I also had a client who just wasn't taking her medication at the right time of day. So she was getting like laid up in the bathroom for 3 days, like she couldn't leave, just lying on the floor. We sent her back to her pharmacist and her pharmacist said, well, you're taking the medication as prescribed, but like, let's try taking it at night. She came back the next week. She had no symptoms. We finished the rest of the program. That was the problem. So like I said, if you're trying all of the IBS things and it's either making no change or it made like a subtle change, but there are still things that are left in there, definitely go back to your healthcare team and kind of suss out like what is going on, or, you know, loop somebody in like me and we can kind of separate for you. These are the symptoms of your functional disorder and these are not the symptoms of your functional disorder. And maybe we could open a conversation with your healthcare team and kind of figure out other things that are going to be more helpful to you. So just to recap, sort of these 5 things that we're thinking about if you're having GI symptoms and you're really struggling to manage them are: 1, are you focusing only on food? If you're focusing on food, are you only pulling things out versus putting things in? Are you addressing kind of mechanical issues? Have you spoken to someone about that? Check and see if you're following contradictory advice, and then see if you actually have IBS. Open a conversation and say, these are all the things that I've tried. This is what it did. This is what worked. This is what didn't work. And I'd like to have a conversation about, is there something else sort of that's in there? Now, I don't like the word lurking. It always comes to mind. But have I uncovered something else that now we can address and I can get even better symptom control? So those are kind of the 5 things that always go through my head, the kind of things that I work through with my clients. But yeah, if anybody has any questions about like anything, even if it's not related to what we talked about, like I said, I love questions. The more the merrier. God. Hit me.
That was awesome. That was a lot. I was like typing away.
Sorry,
like
I talk so fast.
No,
anybody needs clarification, I will not be offended.
No, we do have some questions. We had some questions come in, a couple from Sherry. First question is, what do you have to say about laxatives?
Ooh, okay. Sherry, can you be more specific? So like types of laxatives for what? Laxatives for who? What does that look like?
And she had a follow-up, so I don't know if this is the same thing, but she says, I get bloated in my upper abdomen. Is this often gas or digestive issues? So those are the 2 things.
Okay, so follow-up question, Sherry, how quickly after you eat are you getting the upper abdomen bloating?
So we'll give her a little bit of time to maybe type in.
Yeah, because that's don't know. So would you say that it's like you eat something for lunch and by dinner you're bloated, or would you say you eat something at lunch and by snack time you're bloated? Oh, it's big breath. Okay. So there's a couple of things that can cause that sort of upper. So we say like kind of above the belly button would be upper abdominal, and then below the belly button would be kind of lower abdomen. There we go. Words. So the thing is, if it's way up high, the kinds of things that we think about are SIBO, which is that small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And that's because when we're talking about something like IBS or functional pain disorder or functional constipation or functional diarrhea, it takes a bunch of time for whatever is in your gut, whether the problem is in the mechanics of your gut or with what you're eating. You need a bunch of time for your body to be able to pull in that water or to ferment things. And so for something like IBS, for example, if you're having the symptoms and they're kind of starting at that 4-hour mark up to even 48 hours later, that we would consider a lower intestinal issue, where if you're having symptoms within 4 hours, then we start thinking about like, is it a stomach acid production issue? Is it something like H. pylori? Is it something like SIBO? Is it something like a gastric emptying problem? So if you're having that sort of upper stage bloating, I would definitely try and keep track of how long is it taking for these symptoms to arrive, because that's going to give us a lot of information about where it's like where the bloating is actually occurring in your digestive tract. And I would definitely want to keep like just a food journal if that's okay for you. Like if you have any kind of eating disorder history, if journaling causes you any kind of distress, if it feels like a job to you, at minimum, just take pictures. And then this always weirds people out, but if you're ever having a digestive issue, take pictures of your poop. It freaks everybody out, but your doctor and your GI can learn more from looking at your actual poop, the end product, than you could ever say with your words. So anytime there's any kind of bloating, if there's any kind of sort of disordered bowel movements where they're happening too frequently, or they're not happening frequently enough, or they're very loose, or they're very hard, taking those pictures often, right? Taking the pictures can often lead to a diagnosis sitting in that office. So your GI, if you have a GI in particular, that GI is going to be able to tell this is bile acid malabsorption because I can see the fat sitting there. Or, I can see a parasite, which is, I've had a client had a parasite before, which she didn't know. But like that got treated in that appointment because her GI was able to see something that she would have never known to tell them. Like, is there mucus? Is it really like, there's a whole bunch of stuff, the color, like there's so many things that they know that you're not going to know to tell them. And when they say like, well, what color it is, sometimes I'll tell people to use food, for example, like, well, was it like a mustard color, or was it like a ketchup color, or was it like a Nutella color? Can be helpful, but honestly, those pictures say 1,000 words. It freaks people out, but I've had so many people get diagnosed on the spot with, they're like, oh, I thought it was IBS. It's this other really random thing, and you need medication. There's no tool for that.
That is funny. I've never heard of that, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It freaks people out. It freaks people out. But there's no better tool when you're talking to your healthcare team, and like, they can say no. Some people are like, no, thank you. But most of them actually are like, oh yeah, actually, like, stop talking to me with your words. Like, I would like to see the photos, please.
Okay. Okay. All right. And then can you chat a little about blood and stool?
Okay. So rule number 1 is any unexplained blood, you have to tell your doctor. So if you don't know why it's there, even if you're like, oh, I think it's a hemorrhoid, or I think maybe there's a little tear, if you don't know why it's there, talk to your doctor, because there are different ways to take care of it. And you want to make sure that you're addressing it and caring for it in the way that you need to make sure that it's not going to get worse over time. So if you have just a little tear, you've been really constipated, you're having a really dry stool, it is not abnormal for something to tear down there. But there's a difference between, just do a little sitz bath, which is just, it's like a little bath that goes in your toilet bowl. You kind of sit on it, put some Epsom salts in there. There's a difference between doing that and, hey, you need a cream, or that's in a weird place, we want you to have like an antibiotic cream just to make sure that it doesn't get bigger, or it doesn't sort of get infected. So you want to make sure that you have those really specific care instructions, including when to seek help, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right. Tina's asking a question. Tina, you raised your hand. I can bring you on audio if you want, because I know you've had your hand raised. So I'm going to bring you on. You can ask your question. Oh, there you go. Tina, you're up.
Hi, Amy.
Hey.
For the information, it was so I was writing as well.
Awesome.
I'm wondering, because I was diagnosed after having a concussion, colitis.
Okay.
I was told that a lot of people that do have concussions end up getting colitis. So I had to change all my diet and everything else. But is, like you mentioned about IBS, is colitis part of that family group, or is it separate? I know it's a larger, like the bottom intestines.
Mm-hmm. So you can have colitis anywhere. It's the name of the colitis changes depending on kind of where it is in the digestive tract, kind of in the small intestine versus the colon, or if you have it everywhere. So colitis is not the same as IBS. IBS is a functional disorder, which means that it's an issue with the way that the intestine behaves. Which means, sorry?
I said, oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So IBS, so one of the reasons that IBS is so frustrating is because you go to the doctor and they do all of the tests and they're like, everything's normal. Yay, you have IBS. And it's terrible to be living in pain And to have something so intrusive in your life come with a normal stamp and you know, kind of, okay, like, well, there's nothing I can do, get out, like, good luck handling that on your own. Colitis is an issue with the lining of the intestine. So it makes sense that there would be diet changes with that, because like we worry about colitis kind of freezing in the muscles. But they are separate because colitis is a structural issue where there's something that we can point to and we can test for and say, this is the issue, versus IBS, which is kind of an umbrella for you meet these really specific criteria, but we can't point to anything structural and we can't point to anything chemical that might be leading to these symptoms. So colitis is a really great example of something structural, where bile acid malabsorption is an example of something chemical because our body's not able to produce enough of an enzyme to break down the fat in our digestive tract. So IBS is kind of in the middle, and we understand scientifically that IBS is just an umbrella term for things we haven't discovered yet. Celiac disease used to be called IBS. Lactose intolerance used to belong under that umbrella. We used to mistake SIBO for IBS. And so now kind of as we're understanding these different parts of our digestive tract, we're able to pull them out and make really specific treatment protocols for them. So our goal is that sooner or later IBS doesn't exist. And instead we have a really specific range of issues and treatment protocols, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I guess when you mentioned about the diarrhea, I found like the different types of diarrhea and how you explained it. And I'm like, wow, I never even thought of that. But that
Diarrhea is complicated.
So I guess would that be as well for colitis, or would that be different?
For colitis, so diarrhea for colitis, it's really how, like, this is where we get into those sort of muscle disorders that we were talking about, where things are not kind of happening in the sort of synchronized order that we need them to. With things like colitis, like I said, sections of those muscles are kind of closing down and not functioning the way that they're supposed to be functioning. And so we see things like constipation or diarrhea coming through there just because the muscles aren't doing their job the way that they need to, if that makes sense.
Okay. Okay, well, that's great. Thank you so much.
Perfect.
Thanks, Tina, for coming on. I will remove you. There we go. Okay, let's go. You know what? I realized we didn't answer the question about laxatives. So Sherry, if you want to just clarify your question about laxatives, I'm curious too.
I'm not too excited.
It's funny because I'm running through my group program right now. The 21-day program, the reset program, like the cleanse, detox, whatever. And, you know, we do the flax cocktail during that, you know about that. And I love it. I'll tell you, but I am somebody that, I've always been constipated, always. Like, but when you were talking about these things, I was like, oh my God. And you know, what's funny is I'm running through, I really needed this reset this time, and it's really worked really well for me, but first time ever. And I've been detoxing for over 10 years. Like I've done stuff. But this is the first time it's happened to me where I had severe pain in my pelvis area. And I think what was happening is that it was my change in diet. It was too much fiber. I think it was just that, you know, I eat well, I'm a nutrition coach, right? So, but I think I just changed my diet too fast, too quick, whatever, too much. And I had quite a few meals with beans in them. And I think my system, I've realized it takes me a good 24 hours or so to get things through my system. And I don't think my system was moving fast enough for those beans.
Well, and it's
fermenting or whatever in there. I was like, not happy.
Yeah,
It's like,
there's a whole song about beans fermenting. Let's be honest. It's a universal truth. But yeah, for everybody's information, when you are adding fiber of any kind, like, first of all, we only go up 5 grams of fiber per week to avoid that traffic jam situation. And when you're adding any type of fiber, you always have to add extra water. And that's because your body is very efficient and it rations how much water goes into your intestines. And water is how we break down most of our food. Like, we think it's acid and we think it's muscle contractions. It's mostly water. And so when you're adding that extra fiber, your body doesn't know what you're doing. It didn't get the memo. And so it's going to take out the usual amount of water. And again, you can get that constipation. So we always want to make sure that we're adding extra water in, even if you don't need it long term, just because your body doesn't know that it needs to account for this extra fiber. So we give it that week. And again, you add more fiber, you add more water, but the key is to stop when you get what you want. So like if it's consistent, like it does not need to be every day. A normal bowel movement pattern is once like every day up to 3 times a day, and once a day versus like once every 3 days are completely normal patterns. So as long as you're again not getting that urgency, you're not having any pain, you're not straining, your body's doing what it needs to do. And just because you want it to poop every day doesn't mean that that's right for your body, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And that is funny. Sherry mentioned the smooth move, and that's the only thing that helped me in that situation. Because I always have, I have a whole pantry of traditional medicinals tea. Like I love all their teas, and it's all lined up in my pantry, but I forgot about the smooth move. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on the smooth move, because I tell you, that helped me. I was like, whoo, I don't use it often, but
So the thing about teas, like supplements and things like that, is they often involve senna, and senna touches your muscles. So when we talk about laxatives having like an addictive quality where your body's going to kind of forget its job, what we're talking about is these ones that touch your muscles or they touch your nerves. So there's a couple of different ways that laxatives work. There are osmotic laxatives. So that's like a Restoralax or a Miralax, where you're kind of putting it in and it's just forming a gel and it's drawing in water. It's osmotic, so it's like pulling water from the rest of your body into your digestive tract. And it's going to help like bulk up the stool. It's going to help sometimes pull it together if you have one of those magic fibers that works both ways. So by sort of adding these osmotic things in, we're getting, again, that water coming in, that softens the bowel, makes it easier to move, makes it easier to kind of exit the body. Then we have ones that just irritate the gut. So that's things like Metamucil that are just, your body's like, ew, I don't like it, get rid of it. And it's going to stimulate muscle contractions just because your body's irritated, it doesn't like it. It's going to try and move it through a little bit quicker. Then we have ones that stimulate the muscles. So you're taking things that are actually causing muscle contractions. This is where we start to get into the territory where we're kind of interfering with the body's natural process. And this is where we can start getting those mixed messages, especially if you use it long term, because our body's no longer waiting for the signal that it's time to move. It's waiting for the medication to start the contractions kind of on your behalf. And then the final kind are ones that actually touch your nervous system. So they're going through your actual like nervous system, telling your body to contract. And so those are the kind of highest level ones. So if we're talking about something that you want to take long term, we usually want to focus on one of the osmotic ones because it's not touching your body in any way. It's only adding fiber, basically. Like if you look at Restoralax or Metamucil, it's like 17 grams of fiber. It's polyethylene glycol, which is a manufactured type of fiber. It doesn't do anything. It only touches your poop. Those ones are usually okay to take long term. So if you have chronic constipation, like that's something that you can talk about with your doctor because it's not touching your body in any way. Something like a smooth move tea is okay in an emergency as long as you've cleared it with your healthcare team, because we don't want any kind of drug interactions. Because sometimes if you're taking something and it needs to release over a certain amount of time and you're kind of cruising it through your gut, it might not have the impact that you need it to. So anytime you want to take a tea like that, I always say just run it by your pharmacist just to make sure, because they can kind of look up your profile and see if there's anything like timing wise, like take this in the morning versus at night. If you are going to take a laxative, we do prefer that you take them kind of in and around bedtime, and that's because of something called the migrating motor complex. So the MMC is basically a light version of a peristalsis wave. It happens when we're in a fasted state. So, and it takes about 3 hours. So this is one of the reasons that we recommend kind of spacing your meals out, if you can, by 3 to 4 hours to give this migrating motor complex time to run through. And basically what it does is it kind of cleans up all the crumbs from your digestive tract. So it's helping prevent things like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth because it's kind of taking away all their food. It's kind of sweeping down bugs that have crawled up too high. But because it works in a fasted state, you are going to get several of these cycles while you're sleeping. And so if while you have this little cleaning system going through your digestive tract, you also have a laxative in there, it's going to, again, help bulk up your stool and help soften everything out and help everything kind of get ready for that bowel movement in the morning. So yeah, if you are doing any kind of laxative teas or anything like, as long as they don't cause like urgent diarrhea, we recommend doing them kind of overnight, if that makes sense.
Okay. And what were the good, I think Sherry had asked, what were the good ones again? The good
osmotic laxatives. osmotic, and there's like a whole range of them. You can ask your pharmacist to say like, hey, I'm having some trouble with constipation. I'm looking for an osmotic laxative. They can give you a whole range. The reason I'm familiar mostly with Restorelax and Metamucil is that they're low FODMAP, they're non-fermentable. And so they're helpful for people with IBS who already struggle with highly fermentable things, really irritating their gut.
Okay. And then Tina's asking, what do you recommend for diarrhea?
Ooh, for diarrhea, that is for sure something that you want to be talking to your doctor about, again, because you want to know what kind of diarrhea you're having. And they can take you through a whole questionnaire about like, are you experiencing bloating beforehand? Are you experiencing, like, how long are you experiencing cramping for? Is it coming out of nowhere? Is it urgent? Having urgent diarrhea in the middle of the night is a red flag symptom. So if you are having like urgent diarrhea that you're not like, oh, like that taco like didn't sit well, like if you're waking up in the middle of the night and you're having any kind of bowel movement and it's happening kind of frequently, you need to talk to your doctor, because we are built to stay asleep once we're asleep. And so if your body is like, nope, can't wait, you got to get up and have a bowel movement, this is on our list. It could be nothing. It could just be that you're taking something at the wrong time of day. Like it could be that you're taking a laxative that works really quickly right before bedtime. But that's something that you want your healthcare team to know, even if it's just so that they have it in your file when that started for you.
Okay, interesting.
But yeah, for diarrhea, we definitely want to check that with your doctor, especially if it's urgent. Because like I said, that can be a symptom of celiac disease. It can be a symptom of IBD. Like it can be a symptom of things that are like we really do want to get checked out quickly. Or it can be like, instead of being something like IBS, it can really be something like SIBO, or it can be something like bile acid malabsorption, which you need to have treated. Like both of those things are treatable. SIBO's curable. So if you have SIBO, you want to know, because you can cure it in like 2 weeks and you don't have to be that way anymore. And bile acid malabsorption, there's a medication that you just take daily and your symptoms go away. So if you're having that urgent diarrhea, make sure your healthcare team knows and make sure that they're kind of taking you through that questionnaire to see, like, is it constipation actually? Is it that dysbiosis? Is it something like bile acid malabsorption?
Okay. All right. And I think Tina asked how many times you should have stools in a day. I think you may have answered that already. Did you?
Yeah, so
like
that is going to depend on every individual person. There is no right amount. You will see people say a right, like 1 time a day, and it should be this way on the Bristol stool scale. That is not true. There is no one right poop. And even if you are pooping the same way every day, there's going to be a range, right? Say you poop 1 time a day, right? And it's like the perfect poop, whatever. It's not hard to push out. It's not dry. It's not a little loose. It's doing great. You might have days that are looser just because you ate too much fiber, or you had something that irritated your stomach, or you've got a bit of a stomach bug and you didn't know because your body handled it for you. We usually look for a range of 1 to 3 times a day, totally normal. And once a day to once every 3 days is considered totally normal. It's once you pass that 3-day mark, we consider that constipation. Or if you're going and it feels like you have more left in your gut, so it doesn't feel like it's been a productive bowel movement, it doesn't kind of feel like you're done. Those are kind of things that we look for constipation. And then of course, if you're having little rabbit poops, you're very far gone and you need to talk to somebody about that, because your body's malfunctioning, like not in a bad way, but like your body needs assistance. Your body can't write that on its own. If that, oh my God,
I have a rabbit and I always, his name is Nibbles. I'm like, yeah, I'm like Nibbles. Maybe I should go get checked out.
You for sure should. I'm
not like that all the time, but it's like times, but
it's really hard for your body to come back from that on its own. So sort of recognizing when that happens, having like a specific system in place for like, oh no, I had the rabbit poops. Like I'm going to take a Restorelax tonight and I'm going to make sure that I'm having extra water. I'm going to make sure that I'm eating something crunchy to really promote those strong peristalsis waves to kind of get everything moving for myself. And if that's not working, you definitely want to have something from your doctor in your back pocket. And they're going to decide kind of based on what your constipation looks like. Is that a smooth move tea? Is that something that's really fast acting because you're getting a traffic jam happening in there? Like I have an emergency, like break the glass medication because I have a twisted bowel. And so like I get weird stuff happening in there. Sometimes it's a bit of a circus in there, but I have like a break the glass medication where if it looks like this, you take one of these and we're just going to clean the whole thing out and start again.
Wow. Okay. So Sherry's asking, why do some poop float?
Oh,
this is like a great Q&A session. I'm loving this.
Also, I have a very weird curiosity in life. It does not go past me that I have a very weird fascination with poop. But we see poop float when it's got too much fat in it. The fat makes it buoyant. And so we don't want poop that floats. It's okay if you have it sometimes, like, oh, like I went out and I had a great dinner last night. I was having like, I don't know, like Alfredo or something that I know is very high in fat. My body's not used to processing that amount of fat. If it floats, whatever. If you're having consistent poops that float, or you're having consistent poops that smell, your poop should not smell like a dead body. If it does, you need to talk to somebody, because that can again be a bacterial overgrowth where you just are very you ferment a lot more than you're supposed to. It can be something like one of the particular types of SIBO is very responsive to sulfur. So things like broccoli and cauliflower and like all kinds of meat and dairy, all those kinds of things. If you're getting those very sulfury poops, you definitely want to tell someone, because there are lots of things that we can do to make those go away. So yeah, if it's floating or if it smells kind of rancid, those are often signs that your body's either having trouble digesting fat. So we might see that in somebody who's developing bile acid malabsorption. We might also see it in SIBO. If you have the methanogen specific SIBO, what happens is your body's releasing all that bile, all those enzymes to break down the fat, and the SIBO bugs are actually binding to that acid. And so the acid cannot act on the fat. And so all of that fat is traveling down your small intestine, and there's a little sensor there. And it's like, hey, yo, you're going too fast because you didn't have time to break down all this fat. And it tells your brain goes, oh, sorry, my bad. And it slows everything down. And the cycle just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating until you are just locked with constipation. And so we see that a lot in the fat because you're not breaking down the fat, right? So if it's really smelly again, or you're getting that kind of floating stool, you're also noticing that bloating really high up in your stomach. Those can be sort of flags for SIBO, and you just check that with a breath test. It's got like a 50-50 positive and negative false results. But if you can narrow down the type of SIBO that you have, you're greatly increasing the ability of your healthcare team to prescribe you the correct medication so you can actually treat it, because there's one like kind of favorite medication for everybody, but it doesn't treat all of the different kinds of SIBO. So you want to make sure if you do need the second medication sort of added to that, you can find that out, if that makes sense.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. And Tina's looking for the poop emoji.
Oh.
There is one. So I think I should look through. I think we answered all the questions.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, there it is. And Sherry found it. Yeah, I think we got through all the questions. I'm trying to think if I have any questions.
Well, you have me.
Yeah, I know this was really good. I mean, it's yeah, this was a really, really, really very informative session for sure.
Perfect.
What smell are you looking for breath test?
Oh, it's not a smell. So what happens is you are either going to go to your doctor's office, or they're going to mail you a kit. And you take like a breath test just to kind of put your sample in there to get it started for your baseline. And then you drink a little glass of either lactulose or glucose. So those are sugars. And what's going to happen is as that sugar travels through your digestive tract, it's going to be eaten by the bugs. We have all of the bugs that overgrow in there already. They're supposed to be there. Are they having like a raging party in there and there's too many? So what's going to happen is these bugs are going to eat the sugar, and they are going to poop out different types of gas. So we have 3 different types of SIBO. There is hydrogen sulfide, and methanogen. So what's going to happen is these sugars are going to spike at different times. So they're going to poop it out. That gas is going to get pulled into your bloodstream, and you're going to exhale it as waste. So as you're sort of exhaling into these tubes, you kind of breathe into one every 20 minutes. It's going to show a spike in the sugars if you have it, or it'll show a spike in those gases. And it can determine like all 3 of them. So it's not anything that you're actually going to smell. It's just a chemical that you're exhaling, nothing harmful to you. And they just kind of track how it bumps through your body, because if everything is going well, it should bump at about the 2-hour mark when it's kind of exiting into your large intestine and it's getting into where we expect all those bugs to be camping out in big numbers. But if you're kind of seeing those spikes in the beginning based on, bugs, if you're seeing it spike in different places, we can tell kind of which bug is breathing it in, if that makes sense.
And apparently I missed a question. Sorry, Chris. But I found it. What is the typical time for food to go from your mouth through to exiting as poop?
Ooh, so that's a fantastic question, first of all, and that is going to be different for everybody. That is based on something called your motility or your transit time. And that is just naturally how quickly your body moves food from one end to the other. So we can see it in as little as 12 hours from like in one end out the other. Some people, it takes up to 72 hours. So when we're testing things like FODMAPs, what happens is you kind of pull all of them out just to see what happens if the symptoms kind of get level and they go down by at least 50%. Then we test all of the foods. And when we're testing the foods, we can figure out how long your motility is, because if you're getting bloating, some people who see it in 6 hours, I see some people who see it like on the dot 24 hours later. So it's really going to depend on your personal motility, but it's somewhere between 12 hours and 72 hours.
And I just tested mine for the first
did
time
you?
because, well, when I was going through that weird bloating stuff that's never happened, I decided, you know what, I'm going to take some. When I was doing my flax cocktail, I threw some sesame seeds in with it, and it took 24 hours. I was like, well, but I had to do the smooth move. So I want to do it again without the smooth move, because I think that may have, but I'm curious because I think I'm pretty slow. And but some people are fast and I'm jealous.
Some people are really fast. Some people are really fast. One thing, if you are struggling with constipation, do you have a squatty potty?
I was going to ask, that was one of the questions. No, but I wanted to see what you thought about the squatty potty.
Squatty potties are the best. So for anybody who doesn't know, a squatty potty is just like a little bench that goes under your toilet. And the goal is you put your feet on it and it raises your knees just above your hips. It doesn't have to go like way up high. They just have to go above your hips. And the reason that we like the squatty potty, I think everyone should use it. Like, unless you have actively raging diarrhea, the squatty potty is great for everybody. It reduces straining. It can get more productive bowel movements for you. And that is because we think we poop with muscles. We actually poop with like pressure and gravity. So what happens is our body has a fail-safe system. So you have like your colon, it kind of goes into your rectum, and your rectum goes straight down. But we have a fail-safe in place. It's called the puborectalis muscle, and it is a little like elastic band that loops around it. And so instead of being straight, it kind of has a kink in it. So because we poop with gravity, when you're kind of ready to go, your body's going to sort of dump your poop into the rectum, and it's going to hit this kink and stop, unless you have like liquid diarrhea, which we're not meant to hold in that space. So what happens is, if you are having trouble straining, this is one of the places that we can get that paradoxical contraction where that muscle's supposed to release. And it's like, oh, I'm going to hold on so strong and I'm doing such a great job. And like, look at me. I'm going to like rock this for the whole team. And your body's like, okay, like I need you to let go. Like, why are you not listening? So using the squatty potty, and you can use like a pile of towels. Like when I'm traveling, I use my suitcase, like you put whatever you want there. You just need your knees above your hips. What happens is it like manually releases that muscle. So I don't know if you've ever tried to like squeeze your butt when you're squatting. You can't, because the muscle is pulled to like its absolute amount of tension. It physically cannot contract. And so if you are sort of straining or having trouble pooping, or you're not having those productive bowel movements, just by raising your knees, you're going to make that so much easier for your body.
Okay. I'm going on Amazon. Because I've been thinking about that, and like I was trying to figure out, as I've been in the washroom this last little while, I'm like, okay, I got to figure this out. But that's funny. Money. That's going to be everybody's Christmas presents this year.
They will love you forever.
Chris says, I think I'm really fast. I'm sure I'm in the 12-hour range. Yeah, I'm jealous. Yeah. I'd like to get stuff going. Right? That's for sure. Yeah, this has been. Oh my God. Any other questions? Did I miss any more? Because there's been a lot coming through, so I want to make sure. But I think I got them all. But this has been excellent. I'm so excited that you were able to come on. This was a really good one. Thank you so much. Tina says she's going to get one. I like the ones that are actually meant for it, because you can shove them right up to the potty and they're out of the way. I don't have a very big bathroom.
And it spaces your feet comfortably. Like if you're doing it on like a box or a stool or whatever like that, you kind of get like those bowed knees, and it can be uncomfortable if you're there for a hot minute. Like this is meant to be like the Cadillac of like, just relax, just hang out, whatever. Yeah.
Sherry says thank you. She's gonna drop. I think thank you so much, Sherry, for joining. It was nice to chat with you again. We can actually wrap it up. It is past the hour, so I like to be cognizant of time, for everybody's time, but I truly appreciate you joining us tonight. And I'm gonna put your information in the chat, and some of my information that I typically do, but this is, you can find her Amy's info Oh, I should have put HTTPS in front. It's not going to be linkable, but I'm going to send out the information anyway. You guys will get an email tomorrow with a replay and Amy's info. And yeah, so check her out on Instagram, Facebook, website. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You are so knowledgeable about this stuff. That's awesome. I love it. It's great.
Perfect. Yeah, I love questions. So if you think of something else, send it along.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.